To talk more about the killing and the attacks on journalists in this conflict, we can speak to Tim Dawson, a Deputy General Secretary of the International Federation of Journalists. Tim, thanks for speaking to France 24 this evening. Samer Abu Dhaka, then, good evening. The latest media worker to be killed in Gaza. Your thoughts on the heavy price which civilians and journalists alike are paying in this conflict?
It's as extraordinary as it is terrible. The number of journalists who have been killed are really beyond possibility of imagining. If you look, there were about 1,000 Gazan journalists at work at the start of this conflict, and something like 7 or 8% of them have now lost their lives. That's out of all proportion to the numbers of health service workers or teachers or the general population who died. Clearly, there has been an almost indiscriminate slaughter in Gaza, but journalists have paid a particularly heavy price. And certainly most of the journalists I speak with in Gaza believe that they are being deliberately targeted. You will know, looking at your colleagues when you speak with them, that journalists in Gaza have always identified themselves very clearly, have always worn very prominent press vests, and yet again and again and again, day after day, they seem to be losing their lives. It's an atrocity happening before our very eyes.
Complaints have been filed, Tim, by some committees, some associations for the protection of journalists, notably with the International Criminal Court, in a bid to establish the facts, about why journalists are being knowingly targeted. Do you think there's some leverage there? What are your thoughts on moving forward with those kind of complaints being filed?
Well, I'd very much hope so. My organisation, the International Federation of Journalists, lodged a complaint more than a year ago about the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, the Al Jazeera journalist who was killed long before the 7th of October in the West Bank by Israeli soldiers. Our hope continues to be that if the International Criminal Court does investigate that competently, does put the resources necessary in to get to the bottom of what happened, that could provide a template for investigation of some of the many other deaths that there have been. I'm sorry to say that the International Criminal Court has rather dragged its feet on this for the past year. However, in the last fortnight, the chief prosecutor of the ICC, Karim Khan, has been in the West Bank, and he met representatives from the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, and he assured them that investigation would now be underway and that it would be applied to all complaints that came from Gaza. I don't know how we're going to get to the bottom of some of these many, many killings against a backdrop of so many killings. But what really troubles me is the effect it's having on free expression in Gaza and the example that it's shown to people elsewhere in the world. They're not allowing foreign reporters into Gaza, so the only witnesses we have to what is happening there is the Gazan journalists, and they are fewer and fewer by the day.
The IFJ, Tim, is working with the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate and safety trainers in the field. My question is, what kind of training do you give to journalists in a place where there are no safe places?
Well, that's a very good question, and I wish I had some smart answer that would stop this daily death toll. We obviously provide high-level training of a kind that many journalists receive about working in conflict areas, about the appropriate equipment to use, about the appropriate planning to undertake into dangerous places, about how to position yourself, about how to ensure that international laws that protect journalists as civilians from military forces are observed. To be perfectly honest, in an atmosphere where it seems that the ordinary laws of war are not being observed, that the civilians and particularly journalists are being deliberately targeted, there really isn't training that can protect people, I'm afraid to say. Journalists have always worked as civilians. They don't have special privileges, but they do deserve at least the protection that the civilian population does, which is that military forces should do their utmost to guarantee their safety.
Tim, just a final...
Again and again. Sorry, go on.
A final question for you. We know that the IFJ has called on UNESCO to do their utmost to protect journalists. Is there hope there? Is there still the belief that something can be done to protect people who are essentially working?
Absolutely. We have journalists all over the world have been very generous in providing support, which is channeled through the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate for all journalists in Gaza. And we've been working with UNESCO to try and get in vital supplies. It's worth remembering that almost all these journalists have lost their homes. Almost all of them have lost family members. There is in Gaza little food, very little water, very little fuel. So to undertake their reporting assignments, the journalists are carrying their equipment on their shoulders because there's no petrol. So getting even the most basic aid into Gaza makes a real difference. And journalists I've spoken with have said that has made a difference to them. But just getting aid in, physically getting materials in, is a real challenge. And an immediate step that could be taken would be to let more traffic through the Rafah crossing and other crossings to allow straightforward aid to get in, to allow people, as you say, to do their jobs.
All right, Tim Dawson of the International Federation of Journalists. Thanks for giving us some insight into journalists in Gaza. Thanks very much.